Hi everyone, so today I'm going to be reacting to another viewer's essay. So let's get started. Again, this is informal, unedited, just raw footage, and we'll be going through just my first impressions and a couple of pieces of feedback that I have for this person. Everything will be anonymous. Let's have a look at the prompt first. They were homeless and heartbroken, gazing at the smouldering trail, splayed like fingers on a black glove. That's from the dressmaker. And God damns our kind especially, we will burn together, the crucible. Miller and Ham reveal that destruction is inevitable. Discuss. Okay, so first things first, when you get a prompt like this with quotes in it, you will need to use the quotes at some point, and preferably you'll actually use them as a springboard for your ideas, in addition to actually using them as quotes and evidence in your piece. So that's definitely something that I'll be looking for. I don't think there are any tricks with this prompt. It's a very broad prompt. It's very nice. In fact, the teacher or the person who's written this prompt for the student has been nice enough to supply the names of the actual texts that each of the quotes come from. Usually they won't do that in the VCAT exam, so just be aware of that. So Arthur Miller's The Crucible and Rosalie Ham's the dressmaker, that should be Ham's, the dressmaker, portray their insular societies in a manner which ultimately foreshadows to their audience that in the end, destruction will be potentially inevitable. I think this is a really good start. It's a strong start. It puts everything into context, and it's actually quite good in that it shows from the very start that the student who's written this understands what the examiner wants them to do with these two quotes, because these two quotes are actually just foreshadowing the destruction of the two societies that the text is set in. I shouldn't call them societies, I should call them communities, but that's something that I do quite often. Anyway, fear and hysteria ultimately catalyze destruction as the repressed society's values. Okay, this sentence is a little unclear. Ultimately catalyzed this. Yeah, so fear and hysteria can't really be values, so just be careful with what you're trying to say here. I'm not entirely sure. The crippling parochial and societal expectations in both texts leads to the... Okay. Expectations is plural, so this should be lead. So you can say he leads her to XYZ, but you can't say they leads her because they is plural. Same thing here. Expectations is plural, so you would say lead instead of leads. So there's destruction of theocracy and the town. Okay, so if you're going to say theocracy in the town, you're going to have to say which texts. So you would say theocracy in the crucible and the town in which the dressmaker is set. Yeah, just as a side note, I opened this and I was immediately really irked by something, and that was that the student who wrote this essay initially actually put the names of the texts in quotation marks rather than italics, and I saw that and was so bothered that I felt the need to change it straight away. So that's it's a minor detail. You're not actually going to lose marks for it. I'm just a bit of a stickler with details. So the names of plays and novels should be italicized, and the names of short stories and individual poems should be in quotation marks. This usually doesn't matter, but because I'm aware that there's a possibility that students will be taking exams remotely, it's probably something to take note of. Finally, the prevalence of lies and deception in both texts is critical in the downfall of both societies. Ultimately, Miller and Ham suggest that toxicity in societies cannot be ignored as it always ends in destruction. Okay, yeah, cool. Whew. I mean, I don't feel like it's missing anything. It doesn't have a set structure, and that's totally fine. It doesn't feel like it's missing anything. So I'd say that it's an okay intro. let's move on. By the way, when I say that something's okay, it generally means that it's good. If I don't bring up anything wrong with it, it's generally quite good. um, Both Miller and Ham assert that fear and hysteria acted as a catalyst to the destruction of both the 1960s. Okay. Oh, 1690s Salem. Okay, good. Yeah, just get rid of the and it's all good. Dangata. The repressed society of Salem acts as a crucible. Okay, so if you're not saying crucible as in the name of the text, it can just be lowercase. Crucible that builds up tension and resentment, resulting in the historical outbursts of the witch hunt. The girls dancing in the forest during the beginning of the play foreshadows the future of the town, as the forest symbolizes the uncivilized wilderness, which is perceived to be dangerous, much like Salem after the witch trials began. Miller exclaims that after mass hysteria swept the town of Salem, God was dead. Through the town of Salem, Miller aims to allegorically denounce McCarthyism in the 1950 in nine. Okay, get rid of the McCarthyism. Say in 1950s America, declaring that their scapegoating and mass hysteria destruction in America through okay, I see, comma, destruction in America would also be inevitable. Okay, this is actually a really strong start. What I will say is that I think it's a little ambiguous to say that the girls dancing in the forest during the beginning of the play foreshadows the future of the town, as the forest symbolizes uncivilized wilderness. Um, it's an odd interpretation because you're definitely right about the forest symbolizing the future of the town, but I don't know to what extent you would use that as foreshadowing, because there's never an explicit connection made between the fact that they were there and the fact that Salem would later be, be a place of wilderness and chaos in the same way that foreshadowing is usually used. What I would say though is that it expresses their dancing in the forest is an expression of their longing for something outside of the social order that is acceptable in their society. You could say perhaps that in turn suggests that destruction is inevitable because that repression is building, that kind of repression, that kind of suppression um, acts as, a almost like a parallel to the pressure that builds up in a crucible. And you could talk about how the motif of the crucible that comes up in the play, and well, is in fact the name of the play itself. That crucible is the forge in which their new society would be created. And obviously, for societies to be created in these texts, destruction must occur first. So that is not necessarily the case in real life, but in both texts, that is actually the case. And you can actually make the case for that quite strongly. There's a lot of evidence for it in both texts. Okay. Yeah, I think this was a good point. I mean, it shows that you've done your research on the background of the play. And it's something that I've touched on a little bit in the videos, but that's really only to give you contextual knowledge. Like, it's fine to bring it up maybe once or twice, but I wouldn't bring it up more than that. Okay, let's continue. Similarly, comma, like Miller's depiction of Salem, Ham projects a 1950s Australian community of Dungata, which faced similar problems as the fear of communism in Australia post-World War II led okay, led to the insular community to gossip and lie about. Okay. Gossip and lie about outsiders while females lost their power in the workforce. Ham projected that in this community which valued parochial power, okay, I wouldn't say that they valued parochial power in the dressmaker. If anything, there seems to be an almost strange desire to distance the happenings from any kind of religious belief, because the people have these firm moral beliefs with, by the way, with the exception of Mr. Almanac, who firmly believes in God and calls everyone sinners for what they do. Um, a lot of people, they have these strong moral positions, but a lot of them don't really back them up with any kind of religious conviction. I wouldn't say they valued parochial power um, in the dressmaker. Destruction would be inevitable for the oppressors and the town which value toxic masculinity. Okay, so a common trend that I'm noticing with the use of commas in this student, just two things. When you use an introductory phrase, like, for example, where is it? Let's have a look. Similarly, you have to put a comma after it because it's an introductory linking phrase, and as such, it kind of has a clause of its own in a sentence. The other thing is, a sentence is kind of like a container that can only store one idea unless you give it extra punctuation or a conjunction, right? So when you look at a sentence like, Ham projected that in a community which valued parochial power, comma, destruction would be inevitable for the oppressors and the town which valued toxic masculinity. When you look at a sentence like that, there are actually two ideas in there. The first is that their community valued parochial power, and the second is that destruction would be inevitable for the oppressors. So, if you look at that, that kind of dynamic of two ideas trying to fit into a single sentence, you kind of need to show that um, that they're separate. So you would put a comma here, or you would link it with some kind of conjunction. I wouldn't do that here. I would just use a comma. So be aware of that. And whenever it's kind of like a conditional clause, like in a community that does this, then that will happen, or if you are in a community that does this, then XYZ will happen, you need to put a comma between the two clauses. Okay. Evan's ultimate demise by getting his, I think you mean ankles. His ankles sliced by his own wife. Okay. Again, not a big fan of single word quotes. I've talked about this before. If it doesn't make a difference at all, whether they're in quotes or not, then don't quote it. Because basically, if you do quote things where it doesn't make a difference, it just kind of looks like you're trying to pad out a paragraph with minimal evidence, when really this is completely fine as evidence without you quoting it, right? So again, the rule of thumb is that when you want to quote, make sure that it's because the individual words that you're quoting actually have some kind of significance in terms of their connotation or in terms of why a specific word was used as opposed to a different word. Okay. Portrays that repressive hierarchies are completely dysfunctional as females fearing male power is not the portrayal of a healthy society. Okay, sure. I feel like at times you're trying to beef up this sentence with words that it doesn't need, and kind of losing the meaning in doing that. And the reason why I say this is because portrays that repressive hierarchies are completely dysfunctional as females fearing male power is not the portrayal of a healthy society. Here, I don't think portrayal works because portrayal means a show, right? So, kind of like him showing us that it's not a healthy society, which is fair, but you've already used it up here. You've said portrays here. So, you're already saying that he's showing us. So, essentially, what you're saying here is that he's showing us that he's showing us something else. So, get rid of portrayal here is not a hallmark of a healthy society. Again, I don't like the word portrays here because portrays needs to be like the word portray needs to be done by a subject of a sentence because it's a verb. And the person doing the portraying is neither Evan nor Marigold. It's the author. So instead, I would actually use demonstrates, because demonstrates doesn't necessarily mean that it's not the author, and uh, it does say that it's Evan and his wife, but at the same time, it doesn't have this connotation of like Evan and his wife put on this elaborate show in order to convey this message. It's just that the author used those two characters to get the message across. Hallmark of a healthy society. Ham portrays the toxicity of a parochial society through Evan. I don't know why a lot of students love to use the word portrays. Like, guys, if you're going to use it, make sure you're using it right. And if you are using it right, but you're using it a lot, vary it. Have fun. Like, change it up. Um, Ham portrays, Ham demonstrates, Ham shows, Ham suggests, Ham XYZ. Obviously, suggests wouldn't work in this context, but it works in a lot of contexts when students try to use portrays. Just the repeated use of it is something that irks me, and that's not something about this writer specifically. That's something I say because a lot of students do it. Okay. Ham portrays the toxicity of a parochial society through Evan and Marigold as she unequivocally, wow, I can speak, confronts her husband with the truth that Stuart assaulted little girls and even spied on Hersha. Oh, when she was showering, when she showered. Same thing. Saves words. When she showered. Took her. It took her a long time. Okay. Because you're starting a new sentence here, you need to say, it took Marigold a long time to gain the courage to speak against her husband. I don't know why husband is put in quotes here, because it kind of suggests that he's not actually her husband, but they were actually married, so you don't need the quotes here. And this is what I mean by the problem with one word quotes. Husband, the word husband itself is not a piece of evidence. If the word husband is not a piece of evidence, then don't quote it. Okay. However, until that point, she suffered from Evan. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Until that point, I don't know why it's got an issue with the word point. That's totally fine. Okay. Now, it's weird. It's not that that Marigold doesn't have the courage to speak against her husband. It's that she was not informed of what was happening. She wasn't told about the truth about Stuart. She wasn't told the truth about a lot of things. And when she did find out the truth, and when she wasn't sedated by drugs that he gave her, um, that's when she spoke up against him and actually, did something about it. It wasn't a matter of trying to gain the courage to do something about it. And if you're going to make that argument, then try to make it convincingly by actually explaining why you think that it was a matter of her trying to gain courage. Okay. Suffered from Evan. Okay. Um, you wouldn't say she suffered from Evan, because Evan is not the name of some kind of like disease. It's not the name of some kind of experience. Evan is a person. And you can't suffer from a person. You can say you suffered as a result of a person's actions, or a person's deceit, or a person's manipulation, right? Suffered, you could say from, but you wouldn't say from Evan. You'd say from Evan's manipulation. Here, I don't see why there's a comma. Yeah. Ham's descriptive passages reveal his repeated sexual abuse of her and his promiscuity through her silence when she ultimately broke for his destruction. Broke for his destruction. I'm not sure I entirely like the wording here, but we'll get back to it. Broke. She ultimately, yeah. The other problem that I have is his promiscuity. I don't think that really was a big issue for Marigold a lot of the time because she didn't even know about it, at least not to our knowledge. And when we don't know something from textual evidence, we leave it alone, even if we think it might be the case. If we don't have evidence to back it up, we leave it alone. Ultimately broke for his destruction. Broke. Simply broke. Leading to. I still don't 100% like the word broke, but again, words like snapped would also not be formal enough for an essay. Broke is slightly informal for this context, but it'll do for now. Tilly's continuous torture for being an illegitimate child and a murderer. Labeling challenge the beliefs of Dungatar. Okay, something's a little wrong here, and I'm not sure what you mean. Tilly's continuous torture for being labeling challenged the beliefs of Dungatar, which ultimately gave the Dungatarians, the people of Dungatar, a reason to hate, promoting fear and guilt upon her for a crime she didn't commit. Both. You can't really say promoting fear and guilt upon her. You can say in her. I would use fostering here instead of promoting, but that's just me. Crime she didn't commit. Both Miller and Ham promote the idea that fear are the focal points which. Okay, if you're going to make the point that they foreshadow destruction in the two communities, then you need to show us that they are the key things that lead to destruction. Foreshadowing doesn't just mean that one thing leads to another and we can logically see it just from, common sense. Foreshadowing means when the author leaves very explicit hints about what is going to happen. These weren't explicit hints, they were plot points. Foreshadowing is like, for example, say, what's a good example of foreshadowing? Oh, okay, I know. So in the movie The Shape of Water, um, the female lead walks out of her apartment and there's a play showing in the theater near her home, and that play has pretty much the exact same plot as the um plot of the movie, except replace weird half human half fish waterman with a human. So that actually does foreshadow what's going to happen to people who do know about that play, because they start to see the similarities between the two and they go, oh my god, the same thing's going to happen. That's foreshadowing. This is not foreshadowing. Does that make sense? So foreshadowing isn't them showing that there's hysteria and then us joining the dots and saying, oh, if there's hysteria and it's building up, then something bad is probably going to happen. It's an actual explicit clue as to what's going to happen, not just building up the plot and then having the plot progress logically. Okay. Insular worldviews in both Salem and Dungatar, which abided the parochialism and societal expectations, both crumbled. Miller constructs an image of Salem, Massachusetts, perched on the edge of the dark and barbaric unknown in the looming forest on one side, which was filled with menacing Indians waiting to... Again, I don't see why these one-word quotes are necessary. I say it to all my students year after year, every single one. Get rid of the one-word quotes. Menacing Native Americans waiting to strike. And stormy cold Atlantic and the stormy cold Atlantic Ocean on the other side. This image of Salem promotes the idea that Salemites are completely isolated, meaning that there is no way for other influences to disrupt the strict Puritan worldviews of the Salemites. Danforth and Hale are typical of those in a position of authority, where Miller suggests use of indefinable and nebulous concepts of the devil to whip a man into surrender. Position of power. Okay, remember that your subject for this sentence, or rather your subjects, are still Danforth and Hale. So you would say who instead of um, which or where. Danforth and Hale are typical of those in a position of power or authority who Miller suggests. Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. Suggests use indefinable and nebulous concepts of the devil to whip a man into surrender. This threat is used to divide communities into those who appear to have the moral right and those who are imbued with diabolical malevolence. Miller believes that the use of the threat of the devil or witchcraft, people in positions of power were able, by using, able to isolate their enemies and accuse them of baseless crimes. Full stop. This theocratic standpoint was ultimately under fire and burnt, like Salem. Promotes that in small communities, fear of exclusion motivates compliance, and individuals wield any power that may have to isolate others. They have to isolate others as an infallible way to be part of the society. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So if you're going to say that that Ham demonstrates that isolating others is an infallible way to be part of society, you need to demonstrate that with evidence. You also wouldn't say like Salem, Ham promotes. Like Miller does in the case of Salem, Ham promotes. Promotes is like to, it doesn't just mean to show, it means to endorse something. So you're saying that Ham is endorsing, you know, small communities' fear of exclusion. And that's really not what she's endorsing. If anything, she's condemning that kind of fear of exclusion, which motivates compliance and causes people to try to isolate others as a part of fitting, as, you know, a way of fitting in. You can say, Ham highlights that in small communities' fear of exclusion. There we go. So do not use promote unless you mean that they are, saying, "Oh, let's do this thing." Yeah. Way to be part of a society. Okay. My other issue here is that I don't think that these people are actually accepted. They're not necessarily victimized, but they're not accepted either. The kind of moral position that a lot of people seem to take on this is that, um, and in fact, Ham takes on this, is that their society sees that everyone has flaws, but all of them are unwilling to unearth the kind of moral shortcomings of others because they understand that they are also not perfect and people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones because other people also know their secrets. Like the dressmaker is all about how people's personal indiscretions are hidden in these societies, and in reality, a lot of the people who take the moral high ground on a lot of issues them do end up, themselves being some of the most morally corrupt people. Now, lesbianism and cross dressing aren't necessarily morally corrupt, but by the standards of their society, they're seen as wrong. However, the same township singles out outcasts, being the McSweeneys. Um, Outcasts, comma, the McSweeneys. And the unwed mother and her legitimate daughter. Okay, sure. Tilly maintains her dignity in the face of such deep hatred. full stop, however. However, she's greatly affected by the sustained torment. Ham condemns those who impose societal expectations on others in a negative way. Whole-scale vengeance. I guess you could say whole-scale if you don't say a whole-scale vengeance. Did whole-scale vengeance on the town by lighting a fire. By lighting... She didn't just light a fire. By lighting it ablaze. She lit up the entire town, right? She wasn't just lighting a fire. She fully set fire to the entire town. This destruction through fire could be argued as a result of her ostracization. So it's not argued as a result of her ostracization. It's argued to be a result. A result of her ostracization. Or a way of offering the residents an opportunity to reclaim their lives where there is regard for common principles of decency and respect for others. Yeah. Miller and Ham exemplify upon the concept that you can't say exemplify upon the concept. You can just say exemplify the concept that the mob mentality in parochial society would catalyze their own destruction. So you have demonstrated that in the case of the dressmaker, the strict Puritan, the moral right. Okay, sure. Small communities. Okay, so you need to make it very explicit what you're saying in the case of the Crucible, because I understand what you're saying. You're saying that the fact that they had this power structure where people could use these indefinable and nebulous and largely clandestine concepts of the devil and devil worship and witchcraft to try to force people to do what they believed was right and to enforce ideas of right and wrong that would kind of define the way that people lived in their society. Now, that's totally fine, but you then need to demonstrate how that then catalyzes the destruction of their society. And I think that last part is where the problem is at with this paragraph. Other than that, it's a really good paragraph. And what's great about this essay is I can tell that you've really taken into account the fact that the examiners are really looking at how the texts are constructed. It's really, really clear to me that you've looked into that, and that's where the big marks are. So that is great. Okay. Miller and Ham critique the corrupt systems of their constructed communities in which the characters indulge by projecting an image to deceive others for self-preservation. In Miller's Salem, the nature of theocracy fosters fear and punishment. Thus, again, cause and effect. When this, then that, or because of this, then that, you need a comma between. Thus, most characters are readily drawn into lies and deception. Abigail, an orphan. Okay, so you need a subordinate clause here because it's essentially just adding extra information. The most correct way would be to add it out here, but I think that's just really unaesthetic. Like, we don't do that here. His overture that their creed forbade vain enjoyment. Good. Blah, 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 blah. Endless capacity for dissembling. To escape from the judgment of the town and can a white reputation. I think you mean maintain here. Or retain. Reputation. Abigail, Abigail blames Tituba for dancing in the forest, singing her Barbados songs, inviting the devil. She's not only dishonest, but claims that deception and but she accuses blah, 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 blah. Yep, good. claims that deception and dishonesty lead to ultimate destruction of the town, which is forced to sign death warrants on baseless claims. Okay, but this doesn't show us that destruction was inevitable, right? Like people lie all the time, and it doesn't mean that destruction is inevitable. People can tell very big lies, and it doesn't mean that destruction is inevitable. If you're going to say that the lies meant that destruction would be inevitable, you need to demonstrate that to me. Equally, Ham's 1920s Australian rural community is condemned in other ways as she depicts the facade that is, well, the truth is abandoned, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Again, I don't know why I don't know why bruises and abuses are in quotes. If the words themselves are not evidence, don't quote them. This can be quoted. Now, what I will say about this, though, is that I don't think that it's great evidence because with Septimus Crescent, this is entirely ironic, yeah? Because he wasn't telling the truth. Um, he was giving a theory, and that theory is not true anyway, according to modern science, because Septimus Crescent believes that the Earth is flat, and he was kind of peddling that idea around. And then when he got into an argument about it, someone punched him in the nose, and his nose started bleeding. So it was entirely ironic, yeah? I wouldn't use this as evidence. Blah, blah, blah. Was asleep. I don't see why Parkinson's is used as evidence here. Again, ironically, is an introductory term. Here's just so you need a comma there. Now, what you can talk about is how Ham creates this idea of a cosmic balance through ironic punishment, right? So this in itself doesn't actually demonstrate that destruction was inevitable, but you can say Ham creates a world in which there is some degree of cosmic balance, and we see this in the fact that people receive ironic punishments for their indiscretions. Um, and then you can talk about him, and then you can say, thus, when considering the fact that the town treated Tilly like XYZ, it was, in the context of Ham's novel, almost inevitable that destruction would befall Dungatar, given that uh, Ham has constructed a world uh, wherein punishment is always, is wherein punishment is inevitable to those who commit wrongdoing. Yeah. Again, you'll hear me repeating myself a lot here, but that's because this is just, raw footage. I'm not editing it, I'm not doing anything to it. I'm just earnestly going through an essay. Both Miller and Ham pronounce that deception and dishonesty could be the reason for the ultimate destruction. I wouldn't say pronounce, suggest. I would say suggest here. Could be, and the reasoning need to be changed. Are reasons for the ultimate destruction of societies. Conclusively, I don't like the use of the word conclusively here, because conclusively kind of means that Miller and Ham like their final word in this is that XYZ. Really, there are a lot of ideas here. I guess it's okay. I just wouldn't use it. Allude that in isolated societies like Salem and Dungatar, comma, corrupt, toxic, because you're listing traits. Corrupt, toxic ideals lead to their destruction. Yep. The fear and hysteria that swept through the town and the power of social expectations led to the failure of values and physically their entire town. And physically, I would put it in its own relative clause there, but you don't really need to. That's just my personal taste. Their entire town. The prevalence of deception also proved critical for their downfall, therefore, promote the idea that destruction will be inevitable in communities where toxicity prevails. Okay. Overall, I think it was quite strong. There were a couple of issues here and there. I think at times you didn't drill the idea home. You didn't bring the idea home. What is it that they say in sport? I don't know. I don't do sports. Sports, ugh, not for me. Um, uh, home run, bring it home. I don't know, something about home. I just feel like you kind of like, with a lot of the ideas, you're like nailing on the lid of the coffin where you were like, yes, this is like a cold case. I've got this. We're done, right? And then like you were drilling in the nails of the coffin. And then, with the last nail, you were like, oh, nah, it's fine. I'm not going to drill this last nail in. Do you drill nails? I don't know. But you kind of get my analogy. At times it felt like you were going somewhere and it was really great, but then you wouldn't quite bring the idea home. So, for example, here you talked about how it was ironic that he had Parkinson's, and then ultimately Irma, who he neglected, was asleep. But you didn't kind of bring it home by saying that it shows the inevitability of punishment for the town and possibly destruction for the town because Ham has created this world wherein there is a kind of cosmic justice for all wrongdoing, right? If you had said that, then I would have said, yes, that is great. That is amazing use of evidence and explanation. But like you just were missing the very last bit. It's like making it to third base and then not being able to make it back to home base if you're playing baseball. Um, yes, finally got a sport reference right. Okay. Um, and it was also the case a little bit earlier with the Crucible, how you talked about the girls dancing in the forest, and also here when you talked about Danforth and Hale, and I brought this up earlier when I went through those paragraphs. Like, I would say it's 80% there, but there were, a couple of things that needed to be tweaked just to kind of bring it home. So it's really clear that you have a train of thought with this, but it's just that you're not quite bringing it home at the very end. It almost seems like you're implying what you're meant to say, but then not really putting it on the page. Now, that is really frustrating. I know because I used to do that a lot. Like, I was just like, oh, yeah, it's a natural implication of what I'm saying, so they must get it. But, like, even if they do get it, like I got it here, the examiners can't mark you on something that's not on the page. They can only mark you on what you've written, not what you haven't written. So you need to really bring it home with the ideas. That is my one kind of major critique in ideas wise, because overall I think this is a really strong essay. So, major suggestions. Bring the ideas home. Don't just imply something, make it clear. My next major point is don't use words that don't belong in sentences to beef them up, right? Your ideas can shine through on their own. I'd rather you wrote with simpler words, with great ideas, and those simple words were all used correctly, rather than to have great ideas but then put them in words that didn't do them justice. Because you have great ideas, and those are where the marks are, right? Um, um, my last point for major suggestions is that you didn't use the quotes in the prompt. You need to use those quotes. It shows that you're um, engaging with the prompt in its whole. If you don't use them, it's kind of like a really easy way to lose marks. Um, yeah, it's kind of all I really have to say about that, really, because it's a shame when students lose marks over not using these quotes. Like, and you could have inserted these so easily. Like when you talk about the crucible in your first body paragraph, like the literal idea of a crucible, not the name of the text, you could talk about how this idea of burning is always used and then just throw it in there and say how it shows that their society was made to be destroyed so that it could be reforged, right? Um, And in the case of the first quote, what I would do with it is I would talk about that. I mean, you could talk about that in its own little kind of section of a paragraph because there's so much to unpack. But if you were really feeling lazy or you were running out of time, what you could have done is you could have put it towards the end of this part. Um, I would have put it there and talk about um, how this destruction of the town is kind of similar to the destruction of Salem in that fire and heat is used as a symbol for kind of renewal, right? Um, yeah. Actually, I wouldn't put it there. I would actually put it here as a comparison after you've finished analyzing it, and then I would go into this linking sentence. Um, would it be a minor? Yeah, let's get into the minor suggestions now. Didn't know if I would make this a minor suggestion or a major suggestion. And it's lacking. Try to create more logical flow between paragraphs. So, the idea of a linking sentence that links it back to the contention at the end of every single paragraph is just very like junior secondary to me, because it's kind of like, oh, let me bring it back to my contention because, I want to do that just in case I have accidentally gone a little bit off topic and I want to remind you of what my point was. Um, the better way to link, in my opinion, or the more sophisticated way to link, is to link between ideas, right? Um, so, for example, I would say here, um, into the world views, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So you could say, um, you know, uh, perhaps a result um, of their installation, both societies had corrupt systems, which did blah 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 blah, which uh, in which characters indulged by projecting an image to deceive others for self-preservation. You see how that is like it kind of has a logical flow to it where it's like, oh, I've talked about this thing. Now it's only natural that I now talk about this next thing. But that's just a minor point. Like, I don't think you'll really lose marks for it. It's just a matter of like taking your writing to the next level. So you won't lose marks for it, but examiners will definitely be more impressed if you do it. So it's like bringing a good piece of work to great. It's no longer an issue of like troubleshooting. It's like, this is a good piece. Now, how do we make it even better? Um, oh, actually, let's put this under major suggestions. I would say that this is a major suggestion. Um, So your topic sentences need to better encapsulate the argument made in the paragraph. Like, my kind of rule of thumb with this is that an examiner should be able to read your contention and then your topic sentences and say, cool, we're good. This, I now know exactly what you're going to argue. It's just a matter of how you argue it. But here, your topic sentences weren't always the best encapsulation of the argument. Here, it's totally fine. Here, it's totally fine. But then here, you said that they're critiquing corrupt systems, but you never talk about how those corrupt systems will necessarily lead to destruction or will inevitably lead to destruction. Um, Again, that's just actually that's not a matter of opinion. That's just you need to do it. Um, Again, I'm not the biggest fan of having like a set structure for doing everything, but you definitely need to actually signpost what you're going to say because otherwise it starts to feel very messy and sloppy. Okay. Um, my next minor suggestion is to look into the correct use of commas. So, um, commas are important. Use them correctly. Um, Commas and full stops. There were a couple of full stop moments there. Um, Again, I honestly don't like how they try to teach kids punctuation um, in the curriculum. Like, I just don't like the way that it's taught a lot of the times. And like, if you don't have amazing punctuation, it's not really your fault. I honestly think that it's a fault with the education system, but that's my own hot take that I'm not gonna that I'm not gonna burden you all with. So let's just leave it at that for now. And yeah, uh, that is really all for this essay. Overall, I think it was a really like good essay. I think there were just a lot of minor points that seemed to. Oh, speaking of which, um, quotes. Don't use one word quotes for no reason. Don't like quote random words like Parkinson's, husband, medicine, because those words on their own are not evidence. You're quoting for evidence, not quoting to look like you're quoting. Like, you're not quoting to tick boxes like, look, I used 5 quotes in this paragraph. You're quoting because those quotes should add something. Yeah. Um, yeah. Cool, cool. So, um, that is it for this video. This was overall a pretty great essay. It's clear that this person has looked into what kind of evidence they should use, and that's really where the big marks are. Like, uh, even if their punctuation wasn't amazing, even though at times, like, there were like 1 or 2 sentences where I couldn't even understand what was being said because um, there may have been typos or something of the like. Um, Overall, the ideas were strong. I liked it. There were points where the topic sentences could have been stronger. Um, but honestly, I think this is a really great essay. Um, I would say maybe. Okay, if I was feeling mean, I might give this like a 6.5. If I'm feeling normal, I would give this like a 7. And if I'm feeling generous, I would give this like a 7.5, I would say. That being said, this, not using these quotes, is a big no-no. Like, it's almost like saying I'm only going to address this last part of the prompt. Like, God, I guess 7 is a little nice, considering that the quote wasn't used. Considering that the quotes weren't used, like, and it's such a stupid way to lose marks, guys. Don't lose marks on this. I feel like, okay, so this wasn't really the author's fault if you weren't told this before that you need to use the quotes. If you weren't told that you need to use the quotes before, like, it's not really your fault, but it's just a disservice to your writing. Considering that the quotes weren't used, I'd have to give it like a 6. But honestly, if you had used the quotes, if you'd used both the quotes and you gave me the exact same essay with the quotes in it, used correctly, I would honestly give this a 7.5. Like, yeah, that's all I'm going to say about this. So, guys, the takeaway message is don't lose marks on something like not using the quotes. And now that I have said this, if any of you don't use the quotes in your exams, I'm going to be very mad if you tell me that you didn't use the quotes. And you're probably going to be even madder at yourself because those are marks that you're losing. But anyway, that is all for today, and I'll see you guys next time. I hope you all learned something.